Hi everybody, my name is Roberto Netti. I'm the chairman of Mind the Bridge. Today we will spend some time discussing one of my favorite topics, that is startup investing and corporate venture capital. And we'll have the opportunity to deep dive into one of the main world's players, that is BP Ventures, the CVC arm of BP Group. Today I have the pleasure to have with me Ignacio Giménez. So, hi Nacho, I think everybody call you Nacho. And so, hi Nacho, welcome to the show.
Hey Alberto, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you here.
So Nacho, I think we will go through several interesting topics. Again, CVC is a fascinating argument. There are no silver bullets over here, but are a lot of interesting experience to deep dive. And so today we would like to hear from you what is the positioning, the vision, the strategy of BP Ventures. Probably the first thing to be discussed is a bit to provide some data about BP Ventures, meaning what kind of CVC fund is a closed fund, is evergreen, when it started, which is the size of the portfolio, many investment. Again, help us to size and understand who BP Venture is.
Sure. BP Ventures was created when BP first went into alternative energy, and it was created with the idea of monitoring technology trends in the renewable space. We're going back to 2008. Since then, we've invested about $700 million in about 45 companies, of which maybe 30 today in the portfolio, 25, 30 in the portfolio. The last few months have been very active on exits during the pandemic. During those 13 years of life, we have had several stages, so our investment thesis has evolved. And we have had years where there were not very many investments because there were other things taking priority for BP. And we just have to navigate those times. Since 2017, BP Ventures has been a very important part of BP, trying to open the new strategy, trying to open the pivot that BP is now doing into becoming a net zero company. And today we have a very important role, and the ecosystem of innovation has grown around BP Ventures. We'll talk about that later today, I'm sure.
How many people are in BP Ventures and where they are located?
We are 16 people. 10 of us are in Houston, and 6 of us are in the UK. But we work very closely with many other teams who support our legal, technology teams, digital teams. So our extended team probably is in the 25 to 30 people.
Okay. And do you have a presence in the main tech cluster like Silicon Valley, Israel? Do you have a direct presence, indirect? How do you work over there?
Yeah, definitely. We have people based in Silicon Valley, and we have people in Israel, and also we collaborate with other teams in Asia, particularly India and China. I think more than the number of people, what I would say makes us quite special is the diversity of the team and the values that we promote. We are people from many different parts of the world with different backgrounds, different experiences, different business careers, and we make sure that everyone is heard every time we're discussing topics, make sure that everyone is able to contribute to the scale, right? So I believe it really gives us the edge when we look at investments and working with the portfolio.
Totally. Let's go back a second about the structure of the fund. Is a closed fund or is an evergreen?
Evergreen fund. We don't have a specific amount of money allocated to us. We tend to invest about $120 to $150 million a year, but we don't need to spend that. And if we find that we need to spend more than that, we can ask for those funds.
This is open up the first of the millennial question is, how do you think is better from an investor perspective in the corporate environment, having an evergreen or a closed fund? Pros and cons. What's your take?
I would say by having an open fund, we can have more patient capital. We can be more patient. We need to provide the returns in 5 to 7 years. Hitting milestones, but maybe it's growing slower than anticipated because technology is complex and it takes time. We are happy to wait. I always say that if the company is happy for us to work with them, we can be patient with them later on. The disadvantages of having the open fund is that sometimes you need to collaborate with the corporate, and that takes a bit of time, and we become very picky sometimes into what we put our money in. Of course, you are exposed to sometimes the corporate is doing well and there's more money available. Sometimes it's more tricky times. But I think the important thing, if you have an open fund, is to make sure that you connect at high level in the company so that you are not just a pet project of one exec, but the company is committed to innovate and reinvent itself.
So top level buy-in is critical, particularly in the situation when you have every year to negotiate potentially the sizing of your, let's say, power, dry power, ammo that you have to shoot, and then it's important that you have a strong commitment from behind. And it's not, as you say, you're not the pet project of a single executive. Yes, that's the thing. Is important.
I think that's very important. And in innovation is not a short-term fix. It's not something you do in 3 months or in a year, then you move out, right? So you need to take the long-term approach. You need to take a long-term approach. We have now a life of 12, 13 years. But for any new CVC, for any CVC or innovation team that is growing, they're going to be providing 5 to 7 years of bad news to the corporate. There's nothing coming. There's nothing really, no returns offered. And then hopefully after those 5 to 7 years is where the good news will come, right? So you cannot navigate those 7 years if you're in a roller coaster up and down. You need to have some certainty that there's support, there's commitment, and there's an active approach to innovation.
Also because you are one of the pillars of the new BP strategy, the pivoting into a net zero economy that BP started a few years ago. And then obviously is not a short-term play. It's a long-term vision, and then obviously requires also consistent action across the board.
Yeah, the fact that BP in the new structure that we put in place last year created a business group called Innovation and Engineering shows the importance of innovation for a company like BP at a stage where we are trying to change the whole company. So having that buy-in at a high level is very important.
Yes, because you are referring to the reorganization that BP has done. By the way, is not the only oil and gas company has done something similar. When innovation has been put together with technology and R&D, technically speaking, in the same bucket, if I'm not wrong. And this choice, actually, this is something I would like also to get your take on this, because there's been quite a pretty wide debate. Because on the one hand, putting innovation with R&D and the other technology units makes a lot of sense, because again, I think they are all working on the same thing with different approaches, but working on the same thing. On the other hand, someone says that innovation and R&D are like to putting the bird and the cat in the same cage. and the size of the two teams are not exactly the same. And at the end, typically the larger animal typically eat innovation for breakfast, and that is something that I would like also to get your take. How is working, and how need to be balanced in order to make this properly work?
From my perspective, there are two tools that you can use to change a company. Traditionally, R&D is what corporates have been using. I think something like a venture capital unit, innovation unit, it just shows that you don't have all the answers. Your R&D team cannot, you cannot change the R&D team as fast as maybe you need to pivot a company. So you need to bring the external innovation in. I think there has to be some tension between them, but there has also to be some collaboration, because the CVC unit may not have the best technical expertise. The R&D team may do, and that collaboration is what can help you assess what makes sense out there. I don't think you can put one on top of the other. They are equals, and they have to be respected for their skills. Of course, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and you can say, well, is the R&D going to support something that comes from the outside? You need to put the incentives in place to make sure that they don't feel threatened by supporting and doing the right thing for the company. So incentives are mutual respect, not seeing one as the cool bit and the other one as the old bit. So
you are talking about incentives. Any one that has been deployed inside BP that looks working?
So the way we work with the R&D team and the way we work with the business units, we've created in BP Ventures, I think it's worth talking about this when we talk about incentives, we created what we call Maven networks, which is networks of experts in a particular topic. So if we are talking about hydrogen investments, let's put people from the R&D team, let's put people from the investment team, innovation, let's put people from the hydrogen business unit that have their own strategy to grow, right? And let them decide what the way forward looks like. Is it going to be a ventures investment? Is it going to be an M&A activity? Or is it going to be an internal research, an internal project? So they all work across the company. And is that way of agile methodology when you get cross-functional teams with a very clear, defined mission, defining the participation strategy and what makes more sense? I think that's the way of showing that there's no one new and one old bit. There's no one cool and one less cool bit. Everyone has to pull in the same direction. Everyone is respected and everyone is heard and integrated. I think that's the way forward. For me, that's what I referred by incentive.
That's a very good point. Going back to the CVC, you mentioned that you have made approximately 40 investments. How many exits? And the question is, any exits towards BP?
So we have done like 45 investments roughly. We have had now 15 exits. Quite a few of them back in 2020. Two of those exits have been towards BP. In particular, they have been towards the business builder that we have in BP, Launchpad, which you have talked to them.
Yes.
So those two companies, one of them is Photech, fiber optic technology, sensing technology. The other one is finite carbon. Both of them were ventures investments. Both of them were companies that were not ready to be embedded in the BP group. Before you bring a company through M&A into a corporate like BP, that company needs to have a stable structure, a stable business model. And the companies that we invest in BP Ventures, they're still ready to pivot. They're still very agile. They're still very flexible. So I don't think it would have been appropriate to any of the companies that we have to have involved by BP. Now, going to Launchpad, that flexibility, that agility is respected and encouraged because they're trying to grow bigger. So those two exits, they're still residents in Launchpad, both of them.
So you touch a very, very good point, and that opens to two questions. The number one is, again, the typical question is, what is your horizon of investment for CVC? Because typically CVC are supposed to invest ahead of business. You need technically a bit more long term. So what is technically referred as H2 and H3, Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, rather than Horizon 1. And so typically you do invest, not necessarily, the investment decisions are not in a certain way driven by the business unit, because the business unit has to be focused on today, and you have to be focused on not even tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. And so this is the first question, is trying to understand what is the typical perspective of investment that you adopt. The second one, Collins plays the role of Launchpad. Again, you mentioned Launchpad. Launchpad, for the people in the audience that doesn't know, is the venture builder that BP Group launched a couple of years ago. And actually, it opens the door to a very, very interesting question, that is when a portfolio company is ready to be integrated into the mothership. And for large companies, sometimes it may be too early, and that creates some potential problems. So I would like to get your 2 cents on these two big topics. The first one is horizon of investment, and second one, the specific role that an intermediate player, the venture builder, Launchpad, can play in helping this kind of transition.
So in terms of horizon of investment, we have a portfolio. We want to have a balanced approach. So we don't want to go all Horizon 1 or all Horizon 3. We need to have a balanced portfolio where some of the startups are collaborating with business units, and they are changing what BP is doing today. That's the ones normally the business units like to work with, because they have something tangible to work with every day. But you're not gonna change the shape of the parent company. You're not gonna really be bringing the best of the outside innovation in if what you're doing is short term. So we also have investments in Horizon 3, things that we know can be important in 5 to 7 to 10 years, and we need an investment in those areas. Things that the business units may not even know that they want to invest in. They will figure it out in a few years, but we believe it's going to be important, right? So we have a portfolio that reflects that Horizon 1 and Horizon 3. Because we need to be eating today, but we want to eat tomorrow as well. So in terms of the role that Launchpad plays, I think what we figured out when Launchpad was created is we can... The portfolio companies that we have in BP Ventures, they were still too small to be relevant to make a change in a company like BP. So we needed an intermediate step, something that picked up those good companies with good business model, great people, and by taking out a controlling stake, could bring them to a level where BP could become a home for them. They could also go to the market. They can also go to the market. It's not the only route. But is that Launchpad covers that intermediate step between minority stake in ventures and a business unit in BP. And I think we will see more companies coming from the BP Ventures portfolio into Launchpad, and who knows where they go later on. But I think that gives us the whole spectrum of innovation. Of course, there's another step that. What happens before BP Ventures? What happens from a seed company into your first Series A or Series B investment that BP Ventures can make? We have an incubation team as well that looks at that. So we cover the whole innovation spectrum.
The innovation team is part of Launchpad, is part of BP Ventures?
Neither. It's
another team, yes. So they separated the incubation team also from Launchpad, because if I can remember, original was designed to be part of Launchpad or not?
Yes, but it was slightly. There was no overlap between them. So you need
yes.
You need incubation, you need BP Ventures, you need Launchpad, and then there's business units.
Yes, I remember Siobhan Clark mentioning that at the beginning, the incubation was part of Launchpad. They noticed that from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 100, really two different kind of activities, they need to be managed totally separately. And that's
absolutely,
why
yeah.
And you mentioned another point, which is the typical kind of company BP Venture invest into. Is a Series A, Series B, Series C? You invest early stage, you invest later stage. What is the typical target company? What is the typical ticket? You typically lead, you co-lead, you're on the bandwagon. How do you work on average?
So let me start with the easy one, which is the ticket size. We tend to invest between $1 and $30 million per round. Or sweet spot is between 5 and 10. It's 5 is not too small for it to be significant. You can make a difference for some companies, and 10 is probably where we feel more comfortable. 5 to 10. That's in terms of ticket size. In terms of stage, that have already some market traction, companies that they already know their customers. They've been able to develop a product that is selling or a technology that is being deployed. And when we invest, we are trying to help them accelerate that commercial traction. Now, more and more in a world where there's a lot of CVC units, where there's a lot of venture capital funds, what we find is if you don't go and find the companies early, they may be gone from you. You might not be able to invest when they get your sweet spot. So we find ourselves in many occasions going into the Series A, trying to be the first CVC unit investing at that Series A, leading that round. So we're going early these days than we used to.
So you're leading the Series A most of the time.
Yeah. I would say we like Series B, but we find ourselves doing a Series A very, very often.
That's a good quote. Yes, we like Series B, but sometimes what you like is not something that is affordable or still contendable. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's very interesting. Going back to the relationship with Launchpad again, since we already discussed. So Launchpad is the venture builder of BP. So technically, they might be. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I might. They scale up initiative. This initiative might be originated internally inside BP from employees, as well as most of the time, I think this is one of the differentiators of Launchpad. They are fast tracking the early stage through acquisition of startups that might be invested by BP Ventures, like food tech that you mentioned, or might be external startup they find particularly fitting for the overall strategy. And then they bring them in and they move forward. What's the relationship between BP Ventures and Launchpad? How do you work? Do you work together? How does it work, the relationship between the two of us?
Let me start by saying that Launchpad portfolio is not necessarily the portfolio that is in the M&A pipeline for BP. So the portfolio at some point in time may be acquired by BP, but it may also list, or it may be acquired by someone else. So
yes,
those companies will exit into a number of areas. The relationship that we have with Launchpad, we have a great relationship. I mean, we share office when we're in an office, and we will be soon again. We share office with them. We share deal flow because the skill set that they have is parallel to the skill set that we need, and the reverse is true, right? So BP Ventures is really good at investing and making sure that the investments that we have good governance for those investments, and that we work with the startups. Launchpad needs to make those investments as well, and then they need to work with the companies to provide them with the tools required to scale up fast. So there's a big overlap in terms of the skills and our skill set. We share deal flow. We share best practice around boards. We share best practice around how to manage the companies. And there's people as well working in the interface. The two companies that we exited to Launchpad, for example, Fortech and Finite Carbon, I keep working with them in the board. I'm a non-exec in Fortech and the chairman of, and I think it's a very synergistic relationship and very, very open.
Very, very good. And what about the relationship that you have with the business unit? Some other companies, some other CVC, they do have this role that is called implementation managers to support the relationship between, or the synergies between the CVC arm and the different business unit. I understand that BP Ventures doesn't have such a role. You already mentioned the Maven networks. That is a way to, in a certain way, working at the intersection between different units. Can you explain how the different business units are looking at scouting innovation? Are they independent? Are they supported by you? There are some synergies. How does it work?
So I believe, I think I mentioned to you earlier, in innovation, I believe it's a contact sport. You cannot just do it by yourself, okay? You need to be working with people. And the business units, they all have a strategy. They know what they want. They know what they like. So these Maven networks that we've created across the company, networks of experts, include the business units. Because sometimes they may come across an idea, but they don't know if it's investable. They don't know if it's venturable. Is that a good team, or is just a good idea maybe in the wrong place? So by working together, we can bring all those perspectives and take everything into consideration. At the same time, if I come across a great business model, it looks great to me, but maybe from the business unit perspective, it's not something that they believe is going to fly in the market, or maybe it doesn't really match the geography or the structure. Something is not quite right. So we work very closely with those business units to understand the deal flow, decide where the opportunities lie, go after them, and explore the investments. When we close an investment, we separate duties. The BP Ventures team works with the startup. Our duty is to make sure that the startup has the best chance to be successful. We work with the board, we work with the exec, and we will do all we can to make the startup successful. The business unit keeps, let's say, commercial relationship. That implementation manager is taken by someone in the business. The role is to make sure that that BP brings more than just the equity money to the company, and that the company provides to BP more than just returns, but provides maybe access to a new product that we can offer to our customers. That can be a commercial relationship, or can be just developing a technology or providing the pilots in BP for deployment of the technology. Let me put you a couple of examples. The investment that we had in FreeWire Technologies, they signed a contract with our retail team to provide fast chargers in our retail stations. So you can see that on top of the equity investment, there's already a commercial relationship between BP and the portfolio company. Another option would be something like Beyond Limits, a company that has very good world-class AI based in San Francisco, and working with our digital team, they're doing pilots and applying AI in many different business units across BP. So BP brings sales channels, technology, pilot options through the business units.
But again, is an eventuality is not necessarily what is the main reason to invest, actually, because you have to invest because you see a potential of business. And that opens the door to another billion-dollar question: is a CVC should be strategic driven or financial driven?
I think, sorry to say, but I think it has to be both. You cannot be strategic if you're not being financial. You could be financial without being strategic, but at the end of the day, you have to be ambitious. You have to provide the corporate more than just financial returns. The corporate can get financial returns in many other places. So you need to provide some type of a strategic insight, a strategic value, strategic return to the corporate. So I think you have to be both. In BP, we are deeply strategic, and that makes us very picky because we see well financially, but if we don't find the strategic angle of why the BP has to invest, we will not do it. That doesn't say that the company is a bad company. So I think you need to be ambitious. You need to be both. Having said that, you need the CVC unit needs some freedom to decide where it puts its money. But that freedom is not just to go wild and do anything. You are still accountable to support the parent, and you need to provide the parent with the best chances to adapt to a very changeable future.
Good answer. Yes. Again, I'm taking track of all the answers. Again, most of them are pointing exactly in this direction. I'd like to go back to the topic before, because I think that's come a quite a differentiation between, for example, BP Ventures and other CVC like Robert Bosch Venture Capital and or Shell Ventures. Again, Robert Bosch Venture Capital, they've reshape the CVC in a way that they believe that they having a CVC might also serve the business unit. So they have now, as part of the CVC unit, a unit called Open Bosch, and this unit is managing the scouting for the entire group. Obviously, managing the scouting not necessarily for investment decisions that might happen or not, but also for commercial partnerships. So they decided to centralize all the scouting activities inside the CVCR, because they think is more efficient. Your approach is on the other way around, meaning that you believe that you are CVC, you're focused on doing the CVC and leaving the scouting effort to the different business units. Obviously, some coordination, but most of the time you believe it should be independent. And then there is Shell Ventures that is probably in between, because they have a model of the implementation manager. They are trying to, in a certain way, help the portfolio company to make business with the mothership, in the recognition that sometimes when you are part of a large mothership, you really need a dedicated team to support the interaction. So this is the three models. I honestly, I have no opinion which is the best one and why it works. I think some of them are pros and cons, but I'd like probably to elaborate a bit with you about that, because it's very interesting, your approach, and I'd like to get a bit more about what you think it works and what you think can be improved.
Yeah, I think my reflection on that is ideas. You don't know where the best ideas can come from, and you don't know who in BP or who in your company can get exposed to those ideas. What you need is a system to identify of all the ideas that are coming, which ones are the good ones. Make sure that people know who they can talk to when they come across a good idea. And then let the right people judge if that idea really is worthy of investment or exploring an opportunity or not. I personally don't like the model of implementation managers, because it feels like, in a way, passing the buck to someone else to put that responsibility to work with the business units. I think that responsibility has to sit jointly between the business unit and the BP Ventures team at the investment decision. There has to be a commitment every time we make the investment to work together, not just offload it to a third party and then demand the results. Like the model that Maven networks exploring together, so for working with the portfolio, getting value in BP and for the startup.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there are not silver bullets in this world. It's interesting to see how the different approaches, and particularly how the different models have been changing. Because again, my next question is, what are the main changes in BP Ventures in the past few years? Obviously, you are changing when you see that something needs to be improved and can be more efficient. What you think are the 2-3 main things that you have changed in the past few years in order to make you more efficient, more able to reach results?
So,
and what are the lessons learned? So again, from your activities? What can be done differently in order to make it even better?
So I came to BP Ventures in 2017 from trading. We already touched on that. Trading can be a very solitary space. And at first I learned is that in ventures you need to connect and you need to contact everyone. That's why those Maven networks across the company. Second one is you need to take the long-term view. We touched on that as well earlier, because you're gonna be losing money all the time. Some people think, oh, sometimes you might lose money. We take risks. Sometimes we lose money. I think that's underselling it. You're gonna be losing all the money most of the time, and suddenly you're gonna have a good piece of news, and then you say, well, all the money that we lost for the last 5 years, there you have it, returned, right? But most of the time, it's not for the faint-hearted ventures. You're gonna be in the red, really deeply into the red. And the third thing I've learned is to stay open-minded, because the world is changing, and what we learned yesterday may not be true tomorrow, right? Learn and ask questions. And I keep thinking, I've been in BP now 20 years, and I keep thinking, in terms of innovation, the iPhone only came to the market in 2007. Today, an iPhone is your camera, your music, your health monitor, your internet browser, your credit card, right? You name it, right? So I see that in the world of energy, now that we are going into an electrical decade, everything is going to be electrified. I think the world of energy is going to change potentially as much as the iPhone has changed many other industries. And that disruption is not necessarily going to come from the incumbents in the electricity market today. It may come from a different industry. So staying open-minded, being able to test that wide space that is around business models or supply chains, and understanding how the world is affecting you is something I've learned is really important. In all my previous 16 years in BP, that didn't really matter. BP was an oil and gas company with a renewables arm, but the world is in a totally different place now from when it was 10 years ago.
And how do you believe, and this is my last question for you, Nacho, is how do you believe that the CVC industry will evolve in the next 3 to 5 years, or has to evolve in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would say two things. We're going to see there's a lot of money flowing into innovation and CVC and venture capital. So there's a lot of competition for talent, a lot of competition for good investments, and see companies going earlier into the investment space. Everyone likes to invest at growth stage. Everyone likes the Series B, Series C, right? But in the same way that we feel that sometimes we have to go into that Series A, I feel venture capital units, CVC units, venture capital funds are going to have to go early as well. They're going to have to create a portfolio of seed companies. They're going to have to be working with incubators much more deeply than we do today. Because there's going to be a huge competition for talent and for those original companies, some of them with great IP, some of them with great business models, and for those founders with the ability to grow an idea and pivot and be ready to pivot. That's one. I would say everyone is going to be moving to an earlier stage. Mm-hmm. The other one is a little bit what we have seen for the last 5 to 10 years. The last 5 to 10 years, a lot of CVC units have opened up, and many corporates have now a CVC unit. And this is only because the rate of change that we're seeing in the market is faster than ever, and everyone is realizing that if you're not thinking of disrupting, someone else is thinking of disrupting you. So the old adamant of disrupt or be disrupted, right? So I think we're going to see a lot more experimentation in those corporates. So we're going to see a lot of them maybe closing the current CVC units and reopening them in a slightly different form or shape that they believe plays better to their strengths. In the same way that you said, well, Bosch has changed in the way they approach innovation, the way they approach the whole scouting. I think we're going to see a lot more experimentation in terms of merging the units, creating new units, closing old ones, and experimentation. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot of change and testing over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yes, and again also experiments like Launchpad. That again is not an experiment, but again BP is one of the first players in the world to launch a very, very structured venture builder. I think is another example of how companies are evolving their approach to innovation, also launching new tools. As you say, we were seeing there was a gap between the investment and the potential M&A play, and then this gap needs to be built by a specific tool, and this tool has been the venture builder that might also serve other purposes as discussed. So again, yes, we are. I think probably if I need to conclude our very interesting conversation is that we are in a world that is changing so fast, and then probably as well as there are no silver bullets, as well as there are not as secret sources to work with innovation. I think the only constant is that we need to continue to evolve and change the way we approach and we deal with the market in a way to be able to get the most out of it. If not, probably will be disrupted. Also, the innovation unit might be disrupted if they are not have the ability to change. So,
yeah.
Nacho.
Sorry, just one reflection on that, Alberto. You touched on a very powerful word, which I think is experiment, right? So all these experiments are created, and we need to experiment, right? Some of the experiments will have positive results, and we'll keep them open and grow and reinforce them. Some of the experiments will not go as we would like them to go, and they will be closed down. But experiment is going to be the word. Experiment and testing the hypothesis.
Yes, totally. Because again, you mentioned before talking about the outcomes of the CVC fund that you're losing money most of the time, and the fact that you're losing money most of the time is the one that allows you to make money one time, and this is the relevant one, and the relevant one is something that might help your company not to be disrupted. So I think this is the challenge that most of the corporates do have, to be able to work in a context that is exposed at risk, that in the typical corporate settings is a bad word, but taking risk is the only way to avoid the largest risk that every corporate is facing, is called disruption. And so again, you're losing money most of the time, but the time that we won't lose money, probably that will save your company from being disrupted. So that should be the perspective. It's easy to say, it's difficult to be accepted in the old-fashioned corporate world. Thank you, Nacho, for our conversation, and let's touch base regularly, because I think there is a lot of evolution to be catched, and so I'd like to sit with you in a few months also to understand what new things you have learned from the market and what you guys are adapting, reacting, and changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. It's been a pleasure.